Nice to see all of you guys this morning. I tend to run my presentations a little atypically than other presenters. At some point in my head, I convinced myself that I'm actually funny, and will actually come out with some very dry humor and jokes throughout my presentation. The other thing, other house cleaning rules, when I'm at connected car conferences, I noticed that pretty much everybody uses pictures of cars. And I just thought I would be different and not use cars. So if my jokes are not funny, I think the pictures will actually make you laugh. At least I hope so. So they're there for backup in case I'm not actually that funny. So I've been doing connected car penetration testing and risk assessment for several years now. I've been working in the information security industry for about 18 years. I am actually publishing a book this year on hacking connected cars. It'll be the first book on how to hack connected cars. And one of the things I did want to announce this morning is that one of the clients at one of the OEMs that we work with, their legal department wouldn't allow them to actually write the foreword. So if anyone is interested, I'm looking for someone to write the foreword for my book. So I'm actually at this conference hoping I'll find someone to write that foreword. So a little bit more about myself. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started and sold 2 previous companies before the one I'm running now, which is Breyer & Thorn. I head up the connected car division and previously lived in Stuttgart, and I now live in Mexico. So it was about a 25-hour flight to get here because of the Air France strikes. So I had about an 8-hour layover in Mexico City. I don't know if anyone else got affected by the strikes, but I did. So I am actually virtually on no sleep. I've been awake for about 24 hours, and I'm on about 15 cups of coffee. So if none of you are quite awake yet, I promise you I will be your caffeine this morning. Okay, let's see. What else can I tell you? I've published numerous vulnerabilities. One of the things that I do like to do is start my conferences out with a joke. Try and get everyone to loosen up and laugh. And I typically like to make fun of myself. So I speak at security conferences around the world, Asia, Europe, so I've been to the rodeo. And my first conference, I don't know, raise your hand if you've heard of Black Hat briefings. It's a security conference for hackers. Okay, so pretty well known. So I was speaking at Black Hat briefings, and there was about 400 people in the room. It was awesome. It was an awesome turnout. And I had one of the wireless mics on, and I forgot that I had a wireless mic on. And everyone was coming in the room, and everyone was coming like, yeah, we're gonna watch our hack. It's gonna be awesome. We're just gonna hack VPNs. And I'm like, you know, I need to use the bathroom. I've had like 15 cups of coffee. And I forgot my wireless microphone was on. And I walked off the stage, walked out into the bathroom, and the entire room of 400 people heard me use the bathroom. It was so embarrassing. And I was like, God, I really hope no one finds out about that. That was so embarrassing. I'll just relegate it to the people that were there. And here I am, like, you know, 10 years later, 15 years later, and I'm still talking about it. But anyway, so that was quite funny. One of the things that I really wanted to do was, you know, up until now, actually at a conference in Tokyo, I realized that I was just tired of doing presentations on hacking connected cars. I felt that, you know what, there's so much video, there's so many videos out there, there's so much text out there, there's so much stuff on YouTube about how to hack cars. You know, and it's you know, and with all due respect to the people that are at this conference, and because it's important, you need to demonstrate how you can hack stuff, how you can break stuff. But you know, one of the things that I really felt was lacking was I was tired of kind of getting up on stage and showing this YouTube video of how I hacked a car or how this person hacked a car. I just felt like, you know, and even talking to some of the attendees at the conferences, they're like, you know, it's like mind-numbing. We come to all of these security conferences on hacking connected cars, and we get that it can happen. We get that it's possible to hack a car. But what about how to fix it? How do we address the risk? How do you've shown us that you can hack the car, but how do we fix this? And you know, one of the things that I learned, oh yes, thank you. One of the things that I learned was that, you know, So I've been hacking since I was 13. That's how I got into this. My pedigree is hacking. When I was 17, I hacked into a government network, got arrested, state of California dropped the charges. I went to go work for the Department of Defense in cyber warfare. And one of the things that I've learned, and I'm going to leave you guys with several cool quotes today, is that what can be built by humans can be broken by humans. So I want you guys to get the thought out of your head that there's no vulnerabilities in your cars, there's no vulnerabilities in it. A lot of you probably already know that, but I just want to reinforce that there's always going to be vulnerabilities. Now, the point of my talk today is that it's not about the fact that there's vulnerabilities, it's that the clients that we've worked with, a lot of the automakers and OEMs around the world aren't going to fix every vulnerability. And that's what I love about risk assessments, is that as a penetration tester, yeah, I can go in front of your CEO and your board and your C-level execs and show you how I hacked the shit out of your car. Sorry, excuse my French. But at the end of the day, they're only going to take a risk-based decision on what they fix. They're not going to fix everything. And what I love about risk assessments is that, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide, but it's the fact that in a penetration test, it's the proof in the pudding, right? It's like, yes, I'm telling you this is vulnerable. I'm telling you why it's bad to store your private keys unencrypted in the file system in a world-readable directory. Yes, I have run into that. But it's not just about that. It's not just the practical, but the theoretical attacks, the things that you're not thinking about in the risk assessment. And one of the things that I will teach you guys today is that, first and foremost, I am not about giving presentations and showing you my really funny looking photos and saying, thanks, have a good day. I want you to walk away with something. This is going to be very instructional. I have developed a tool for performing risk assessments, and I am making that available for free for all of you. You guys will all be able to go home, download my tool, download the procedure, follow the risk assessment. You will actually be able to walk away with how to do this. It's not just about, and that's one of the things that another reason why I wanted to do these presentations on risk assessments is there's very little material out there on it. One of the things I talked about in the professor here from Chalmers is that there were 2 students who did a master's thesis in 2014 on performing threat models and risk assessments against connected cars. That's one of very few papers out there on this. You go and you Google it, you're not going to find much. So this material today, I have never taught before. It's right out of section 2 of the book that I'm publishing this year. So this is new material and some cool photos. So anyway, okay, enough of the table of contents. So why risk assessments? Again, penetration testing really is, it's neat, it's cool, it's kind of got this sexiness factor, but what I don't like about penetration testing is you're limited by your exploits. What does that mean? If I tell you that I can hack your telematics control unit through GSM, I am limited on what I can show you or prove to you based on the exploits that I have available to me, or that I'm readily available to either develop or create or script. I'm limited by the tools that I have. And it's possible, it's very possible that vulnerabilities won't get discovered or won't be thought about, and I feel like risk assessments are more holistic. So some of you may disagree. I know it's a religious debate. I'm not saying penetration testing is bad. I'm not saying it's wrong. I do it. It's a huge part of our business. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. You need to do it. But what I love about risk assessments is one thing, and several of you probably know what I'm about to say. Asset register. A lot of our clients that I run into don't even know what their assets are. The very first step, some of you are nodding your heads, the very first step in a risk assessment is cataloging your assets. I can't tell you how many TCUs and head units I've compromised because the company came back and didn't know that. We didn't know our developers put that in there. We didn't know. We didn't know that that was in there. Asset registers are critical to you at your companies in making sure you know what you've got in the unit. You can't protect something you don't know you had. Take that away with you today. You can't protect something you don't know you had. Again, it's selling fear. I'm a really big believer that that's wrong. It's important to explain and show and demonstrate to people that this is bad. Okay, I'm not saying that that's not true. 10, 15 years ago, information security for me was different, right? 15 years ago, information security was, oh, I hope our web server doesn't get hacked and defaced because it'll affect our share price, or it'll affect this or affect that in consumer confidence. Now, what I love about hacking connected cars is it's not about, oh my God, if we get hacked, it's, our website will get defaced. It's, oh my God, we've been hacked. What about the passengers in that vehicle? It's safety, it's life-related, and that's what I love about this area of security now. Okay, really quick stuff. Definitions, I'll breeze through this. Vulnerabilities. Basically, it's this simple. A vulnerability is a breakdown or deficiency in a system, an asset, that has the potential to impact confidentiality, integrity, and availability of a system. Now there's all kinds of different definitions for vulnerability, but that's really the simplest way I can explain it. A threat is not only just intentional damage, but accidental damage. That's also a threat. So threats are basically anything that can take a vulnerability, exploit it, and be able to have that impact or put the impact on confidentiality, integrity, or availability. Risk. Okay, so this one, I actually have changed my mind on this. I used to believe that risk equals to threat times vulnerability. If you don't have a threat, you don't have a vulnerability. If you don't have a vulnerability, you don't have a threat, you don't have risk. 1 times 0 is 0. 0 times 1 is 0, right? You can have a vulnerability, but if you don't have a threat to exploit it, there's no risk, right? But I've changed my mind on that, and I like the formula risk equals to probability times impact, because if you think about it, you don't have probability if you don't have a vulnerability and you don't have a threat. Same with impact, right? So it encompasses it anyway. And so one of the things that you guys will find is, short of a math lesson today, I will show you that this is actually a mathematical formula, that these individual things like probability and impact go into your mathematical formula to determine and calculate what that risk is. Okay. So first things first, let's talk about the risk assessment process. The first thing you're going to do is do a threat model. Threat modeling is not a risk assessment. There's different types of threat models. There's the STRIDE model, which was developed by Microsoft, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I'll go into some more detail with these after this chart, and then there's the EVIDA model. Now, previously, we were actually performing a lot of these with the EVIDA model is the model. I've since changed that modus operandi, and I'm starting to actually incorporate ISO. I don't know why I'm an ISO girl, call it because of ISO 27001, because we work with a lot of European companies. NIST is a kind of a bigger thing in America and the United States. ISO is more international. And we work with so many international clients in Asia and Europe, I felt that ISO and that flavor of ice cream was probably going to be the best thing to go with. So I've since changed my methods. After you do your threat modeling, you're going to perform a risk assessment. Again, you can decide on your own threat taxonomy. You can decide on your own risk assessment framework. There's no right answer to this. Just the only wrong answer is not doing it, right? And as a penetration tester, one of the things that I have actually begun to do lately is tell people, you know what? I think we're doing penetration testing wrong. I think, in my experience, companies are hiring penetration testing firms and outside penetration testers to come in and say, hack our network, hack our system, hack our head unit, hack our TCU. How can you ask someone to come in and hack your system if you don't even know what it is you've got, right? You can't really do a thorough penetration test if you don't know what the assets are that make up that system. Think of it as like Lego blocks. Think about it as like, something if you ever put together Legos when you were a child, right? How can you affect the stability of your Lego blocks if you don't know where every Lego is placed? How can you understand the vulnerabilities of that without knowing what's actually in there? So I believe that penetration testing is done wrong. It's backwards. You should first do a risk assessment, then a penetration test. The third thing, risk treatment. This is big. Not only do we have our risks, not only do we have our unacceptable risks to the business, but now we need to actually treat those risks, okay? All right. All right. Threat modeling. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to explain how to do a threat model. Then I'm going to explain how to do a risk assessment. And again, this is me just using different models over the years and deciding what works best. It may be best for me, but it may not necessarily be best for you and your organization. All right, I will let you know, especially when we come to the report side, what you guys should be focused on and customize to your business. You guys are going to be able to go down and download the template and the tool for this. In the template, there is a section, there's an area of the tool where I actually highlight that you guys should actually customize this for your business and your product. Okay. Threat modeling is illustrating objectives of the system mapped to relevant threats and vulnerabilities with corresponding mitigations. What does that mean? It's really simple. You're basically mapping out what this thing looks like. And it's funny, I walk into these multi-billion-dollar corporations, these huge publicly traded companies, thousands of employees, and they don't even have engineering documentation explaining the system that they've built that's going into these fleets of cars. I don't understand this. It's like a lot of companies just go right into product development, and they're like, forget the documentation. We don't really need that. It's really scary. And there's a great quote. I don't know if there's any Americans in the audience, but by the way, I am American. I just want to let you know that. Please don't hate me. I did not vote for Trump. I had nothing to do with that. Okay. All right, we're good. So I was like, oh God, what if they don't laugh at that? Okay, so where was I going with that? I can't remember. Okay, that's what I get for telling a joke in the middle of a sentence. All right, so what was it? Great. Oh yes, thank you. Yes, great quote, great quote. Okay, so Abraham Lincoln, not the Swedish Abraham Lincoln, but the United States, the American Abraham Lincoln, had a great quote. If I had 8 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend the first 6 hours sharpening my axe. I love that quote. People make fun of me because they tell me I need a project management plan to go get a cup of coffee. I'm very obsessive compulsive and OCD. I need a plan for everything. A lot of companies just go right into this with a lot of documentation missing. In a risk assessment, we end up having to interview stakeholders, and the problem with a lot of companies is those people with the tribal knowledge that built the system in the first place, guess what? Don't work there anymore. It sucks. This is a real life problem. This is a real modern day life problem. This stuff is not getting documented, and these people are walking out the door with this tribal knowledge. So documentation. Okay. So there's different models. There's the stride model. Now, what you're doing is you're basically just defining a threat taxonomy. That's all you're doing. You're saying, okay, this particular type of attack fits into this kind of category, threat taxonomies, okay? So all of these different models have pretty similar threat taxonomies. There's Octave, there's the OWASP. For those of you who are penetration testers in the audience, you recognize OWASP. It's the same guys and gals that develop the OWASP and run the OWASP project and the Web Application Penetration Testing Guide. OWASP has pretty much the same kind of vulnerabilities. They all fit into these main buckets of spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. What is spoofing? Spoofing is very simple. It's I'm pretending to be something I'm not. One of the most common attack vectors, and I will fit little anonymized stories into my presentation today. We had a client, and one of the things that they did was they had an inherent trust. And I'm trying to remember if that client is in my audience today. But we had a client where there was inherent trust between the TCU and the head unit. All of you guys know, or most of you guys know, that a head unit, a TCU communicates with a head unit over typically wireless, right? So usually the head unit acts as the wireless access point. It's pretty much the nerve center of the wireless network. The TCU, or the telematics control unit, by the way, this is usually the communication gateway in the car that's typically hacked through GSM, all right? So the TCU communicates with the head unit over a private wireless network. Typically, the head unit isn't supposed to broadcast that SSID because it's supposed to be a private network between that and the TCU. And then the head unit will have like a public wireless network that's public in the sense that it broadcasts the SSID to the passengers in the vehicle. Okay, this is like the public side, and then the TCU network is the private side. Well, this particular customer that we had an inherent trust relationship where if we spoofed, it basically trusted any traffic from that interface and from that wireless network. And we were able to spoof and pretend that we were the TCU and communicate with the head unit, and the head unit thought we were the TCU. Vice versa, the TCU connected with us thinking that we were the head unit. It's called an evil twin attack, and I'll talk about that over Wi-Fi attacks. However, I just want to explain to you, spoofing is pretending to be a system in the network, in the in-vehicle network, or any kind of network, and you're not really that thing. Okay? So tampering, that's data tampering. I'm going to take a packet, I'm going to intercept it on its way to its destination, I'm going to modify it, and I'm going to forward it back on, and you're not going to know, you're going to be none the wiser that that data has been modified or tampered in transit. Okay, so instead of saying /bin/sh and forward it to the head unit, I'm going to change it to /bin/sh, and the command will fail. Okay, that's an example of tampering. That also falls under integrity, depending on the model. Information disclosure, that's pretty much just PII or any kind of sensitive information that's being spilled or disclosed when you didn't want it to. Denial of service is availability. I'm going to basically knock that head unit or knock that TCU offline. That's a very common thing. And it's really interesting to me because in the computer security world, when I'm doing a penetration test against a target computer network or a target server, usually when there's a denial of service vulnerability, customers don't usually really care about that, right? It's like, okay, if you can get a root shell or if you can get Windows domain admin on my network, I care about that. I don't care if there's a DOS you find. Don't take that server offline. It's processing, accounting, or finance stuff. Okay, so with denial of service in a car, though, you have a major problem. If that TCU is responsible for E911 or is responsible for phoning home for emergency services, what if I drive your car off the road and then I disable it, do a denial of service attack against the TCU and it can't phone home? It can't call 911 services. Denial of service in a passenger vehicle is quite critical compared to, say, a web server. Escalation of privilege is simply I've just gained a regular user account shell on your NVIDIA Linux head unit running NVIDIA Linux, and I've dropped in as user HTTP. Escalation of privileges, I now want to be root so I can do anything I want on the file system. That's escalation of privilege. Okay. Let's talk about the stride model. This is a model that was developed by Microsoft, and Microsoft actually developed a tool that you can go download right now. It's free. The only thing is I'm a Mac user, I'm a Linux user, and there's only a version for Windows. Thank you, Redmond. So you can go download tool. The neat thing about Microsoft's tool, their SDL tool, is it actually has built-in support for charting out, doing threat models for ECUs. So it has those all built into the tool already. And it will create this threat model and actually export a corresponding report of all the vulnerabilities associated with what you've diagrammed in your threat model. Pretty neat stuff. So this is the stride model. We talked a little bit about this already. I'm going to try and go a little faster here. Microsoft Threat Modeling Process. By the way, this presentation is being filmed and streamed live. If there's a camera in the back with this whole Facebook thing and everything with privacy. If you don't want to be filmed, there's a camera in the corner of the room filming this. If you guys want, you see a lot of you guys writing stuff down. This will actually be going on my YouTube channel. So if you guys want to come back later on YouTube, watch it. All my videos and past conference presentations are on that channel. But anyway, okay, so Microsoft's threat model is very simple. First things first is you define your objectives. What are your security objectives of the system? Next, you're going to describe the system and create a system overview. In the tool that you guys can go download, I have a sample in there. So it's going to be in the book, but it's also in the downloadable tool that you guys will be able to download. And I've filled out all these sections for you and an example penetration test or an example risk assessment. All of that data is in there. So you're going to basically just describe the system. What does the system do? What does the function do? Next, you're going to decompose the system into its smaller parts, mapping data flows. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a penetration test, and I had the security guy or girl and the developer, and I was hoping, like, look, I shouldn't be able to go from this side, this network, over to this network. Why can I do that? Why? There needs to be some sort of network isolation or network segmentation. It's a flat network. You guys need to fix that. Put in a firewall. OK, we'll put in IP tables. OK, great. Do it. And then we'll sit there and, like, I'm like, hey, let's do this. Put in an IP table firewall. Oh, we don't know the ports and protocols that we use. I'm sorry, what? What do you mean you don't know that? A lot of, it's back to documentation. We've had a lot of companies that I've worked with where they just didn't know what ports and protocols all the applications running on their head unit is using. So they know it's TCP, and they think they have Apache running on there. They think it needs 443. All of this stuff is just not, you need this documented. So I'm sure this is a systemic problem with a lot of the companies, people in the audience. Documentation. Identify the threats. Identify all the threats. Oh, and by the way, back to decompose. You want to document the actual, not just the ports and protocols, but the direction of the traffic. When you're creating the IP tables rules, you guys want to be able to specify the direction that the traffic should be going. All right, you don't want to open it up both ways. Identify your threats, including intentional and unintentional, as well as natural disasters and vulnerabilities. Now, all of the threats, you're probably thinking, well, Alyssa, I don't know what all my threats are. There's actually published lists out there. You guys can go out and download published lists on potential threats as well as potential vulnerabilities to these systems. OK, so this is what a sample threat model looks like. Again, in that master's thesis, I'm going to massacre these names. I apologize. Kadervelin and Soderberg-Rivkin. But this is that master's thesis that I told you guys about. This is an SDL threat model that they created for their master's thesis, and it's just right out of Microsoft. And as you can see, when they mapped the communication, this particular threat model, I chose this because this is, and OTA is such an awesome attack vector when you're working with a telematics control unit. But the neat thing about this is you guys can see where they modeled how the individual ECUs will actually talk to each other within the system. This is a basic threat model. This is how simple it is. All right, so you're creating these threat models, and then you're mapping them to vulnerabilities and controls. Now, so this is, again, using the Microsoft SDL threat model. There's no web-based. I tried looking for a web-based version of this. I tried looking for a Mac version, and it's just not there. So hopefully you guys are running Windows if you want to use that. EVIDA. So this was a project, some of you may be very familiar with this. I think it's dead. I think it went from 2008 to 2011. I think it ended in 2011. But a lot of the OEMs got together and created this consortium, if you will, this group. It's this framework. So you guys can actually use it as a framework. It focuses on 4 main areas of risk: privacy, financial, operational, and safety. Now, I actually took the EVIDA model and I sort of bastardized it with the ISO model, and I just kind of merged the two. So the methodology that you guys will see in my tool and the methodology you'll see today actually merges the two. Let me explain why. So when you're doing a risk assessment, you're analyzing the risk of how much is this asset worth, right? First thing you do is you create an asset register and you determine how much are your assets worth. How much are they high value assets? Are they low value assets? In order to value the assets, you need to understand what sort of impact to confidentiality, integrity, and availability would be to the cash flow of the business, the cost of the business, lawsuits, contractual loss, cash flow, right? And I was thinking, well, geez, in a car, if 3 people die, it's pretty much going to be the same thing as 1 person dying when it comes to your brand getting demolished in the news. We've seen Tesla, right? Tesla is a big one in the news with the recent death that the death that had happened with, I think, Autopilot. But basically, you just want to, so I took this model and said, what if we were to change this? What if we were to actually modify the ISO risk assessment process and say, okay, what would the impacts to confidentiality, integrity, and availability have instead of on cash flow to these 4 areas? Okay, so I go into explaining that. So the individual areas of EVIDA are privacy, protect the privacy of the vehicle, the drivers, and the intellectual property of vehicle manufacturers and their suppliers. Financial, prevent fraudulent commercial transactions and theft of vehicles. That's another big one too, right? So people being able to actually go onto the head unit, choose an app to either pay for it, download it. App marketplaces, I always tell people cars aren't cars anymore. They're just mobile phones with wheels, right? Or computer systems with wheels. Operational, maintain the intended operational performance of all vehicle and ITS functions, and safety, ensure the functional safety of vehicle occupants and other road users. I talk a little bit about Octave. How am I on time, by the way? Am I going too slow? Okay, 10 minutes? Okay. So this is the Octave method. I've talked a little bit about this, but the interesting thing about Octave, and I'll show you the model here. It still focuses in the 4 areas, but the interesting thing is it actually divides the risks into inside risks and outside, accidental and deliberate. So, again, 4 main areas: disclosure of information, modification of data, loss or destruction, and interruption, right? So that's availability. You guys can all kind of see how these really kind of walk and talk the same way. They're just calling it something different. It pretty much falls into these main 4 or 5 buckets. Okay, risk assessment. Okay, so the purpose of a risk assessment is to identify assets and assess their relevant threats, vulnerabilities, threat and vulnerability pairs, and calculate their residual risk in order to treat them to an acceptable level. You want to basically look at the individual risk assessment models that are available to you: Octave, ISO, OWASP, EVITA, and DREAD. Again, I went with the ISO model. First, identify assets. Identify all assets that can affect the CIA of the system. Value the assets, and worst case impact of confidentiality, integrity, or availability. And only assets have a certain value should pass to the next step. I've seen companies waste their time on taking all assets and moving them over. Don't do that. It's a waste of time. Just take anything over, I'd say, a medium value, medium to high, and carry those over to the next step in the risk assessment process. Risk assessment process, the whole risk assessment itself, a really big thing is interviews with stakeholders. That's pretty much most of what you're doing, is you're interviewing other people in other departments in the company. You're talking to people you probably never talked to before. You don't want to waste their time doing a risk assessment on an asset that no one cares about, that really has no major value. Threats, identify all threats to the system. Vulnerabilities, identify all vulnerabilities to the system. And then you're going to start analyzing the probability of something happening. The potential for an actual threat to exploit that specific vulnerability, assuming that there's no controls. I've been in a risk assessment, and it's a very religious debate, right? So Jim may say, oh well, I think this is a really low risk or low probability of this happening, but Jane may come in and say, well, no, I think there's a high possibility of that happening, and you're crazy, Jim. Well, had to referee sparring matches in conference rooms. People get really, especially when you're talking about developers, no offense to any developers in the room, but developers get very touchy when it comes to their code. And engineers get very touchy when it comes to their stuff. People are very touchy, right? And I've had 2 people storm out in the middle of it. I've been in a meeting and had people get in their face, and I thought they were going to start throwing punches, and I was, jumping underneath the table. You just understand that people are very sensitive, and everyone's going to have a different answer. The point is that you're the person performing the risk assessment. You're interviewing them, getting their information and details that they know, and you're making the calculations, using that empirical data to present it to management, at least something that's been done. I may come up with a different risk score than you, but that doesn't mean yours is wrong. It just means that you came from a different perspective. Residual risk. Evaluate the new risk score, taking existing controls or mitigating factors into consideration. Impact and probability scores are reevaluated. So after you analyze the potential risk score without controls, you're then doing it again and saying, oh, but we put in IP tables after we figured out what the application directions and ports and protocols we use are. That then gets reevaluated, and you do it again with IP tables or whatever, sandboxing. Let's say you've sandboxed an application. Next thing is risk treatment. Risks above those acceptable to the business will go through a risk treatment process. I've been asked numerous times what that acceptable risk score should be. I never like getting that question because that's really not up to me. That's up to you. It's up to your business to decide. If you're in the IT security department and you're doing this risk assessment, or if you're in compliance and you're doing this assessment, it's not your job to determine what's an acceptable risk to the business. It's the business side. You need to engage the business side of the company. Remember, information security is always a cost center at every company. So your opportunity is now to explain to upper management and the business side why you're there and why you exist. Okay, so risk treatment, and then rinse and repeat. I added rinse and repeat because you need to rinse and repeat this. We came in, we did a risk assessment, and one of the system components for this client came in as acceptable risk. It was just below the score. Somebody came in, made a major modification that impacted CIA and changed that risk score. They didn't do a new risk assessment. You guys need to do a risk assessment every time there's a major change. This is not point-in-time security. It doesn't work that way. Okay, you're doing risk assessments throughout the development process, right? As new things change, as new things get added, it's affecting the risk tolerance or risk score that you're doing. Okay, let's talk about a risk assessment step by step. All right, the fun stuff. All right, step one, identify all the assets. We talked about that. Information, technology, and services. Now, let me tell you how bad this can go wrong. When you're doing a risk assessment, you need to remember it's not just about the screws and bolts, and it's not just about the little switches and the Ethernet ports that are going to get soldered closed in production, and it's not about the debugger port and SSH that'll get turned off in production. It's also the directories, okay? So we were doing a penetration test. I had gained shell access to the machine, and I found out that the client was taking, they had the initial key of the unit, the initial key of the TCU, and it was stored in plain text, world readable directory, world readable. A regular user could view this, and it's the initial key for the unit. And guess what? By the way, I'm sure a lot of your companies do this. The same initial key is used in every single unit in the entire fleet. So if you had that initial key and you got your hands on it, guess what we did? Well, we took the private key, we loaded it into our password cracker, and we cracked the password. It took about 35 seconds. You know why? The password was password. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. The password was password. All right. The developers came back. No offense to developers in the audience. The developers came back and said, well, if someone's got access to the system anyway, it's not that big of a risk if the password is password because we're game over. No, it doesn't work that way, right? It's like kind of saying, well, why should I lock the door to my house? If there's a robber in the neighborhood, I'm already screwed anyway, so I might as well just leave the door open. Doesn't work that way. Don't set your password as password on keys, on private keys. Anyway, my point being is that an asset can even include that directory where you're storing those private keys. I know I'm going over. I'm sorry. OK, so consequences of loss to CI is step 2. You're going to value the assets. High, medium, and low chart. You guys will see this in the tool that you can download. I think the first thing we're going to make available is the actual document tool, and then we're going to come out with a cloud-based tool that you guys can use. Step 3 is identify the threats for each asset, define what can impact its CIA. And again, you're going to have that same table. I've pre-populated all the values for you. So you're going to identify the vulnerabilities, and they're going to get rated and categorized from physical, hardware, software, communications, human. I've got a few in here like missing patches, outdated firmware. We ran into one head unit where they were using an old web browser as a client-side attack. We could actually put, it was actually pretty neat. We created a backdoor with Metasploit, and we got the head unit to actually download the backdoor and execute it as an ELF binary or something. And we actually had a backdoor Metasploit shell to the head unit. It was really cool. And it was because of a vulnerable web browser. OK, step 5. I've got a lot of really cool stories. You guys buy my book. There'll be a lot of stories in there. OK, step 5. Determine the probability of the threat exploiting the vulnerability. Again, you want to determine how probable it is to actually happen. For example, for about, I don't know, quite some time ago, it cost you about $50,000 to build a rogue base station where you're pretending to be the cell tower so your car can associate to your rogue base station and you can sniff all the packets. Now, I can go to Nuance, buy a $400 Blade RF, install Linux on my laptop, and I've got a fake cell tower. I've got a fake rogue base station. and cause the TCU to associate to my rogue base station and capture all the packets between that and the backend. It's probability of something happening. If something costs $1 million to attack that particular risk or a threat, I guess you guys really have a low probability, don't you? Right? Not every 14-year-old picking their nose in their bedroom will be able to afford something like that. Calculate inherent risk score. This is your actual scoring. This is something you guys need to customize. Please don't email me saying, Alissa, your scores are too low. I fed those scores in there based on how I use it with some of the organizations. I always customize this to the client. Do that if you're going to use the tool. Okay, you're going to customize those values yourself. And then the final steps. Step 7, you're going to identify the controls, and then you're going to calculate the residual risk. You need to rerun that risk assessment with the controls in place, whether IP tables or something else, and you're going to recalculate that residual risk. Okay, so believe it or not, that is it. That's the end of my presentation. Okay, no more really dry humor and bad jokes. There is a free tool that will be available. I think the file, the document tool is available now. And then there's going to be a cloud-based tool that's going to be coming out as well, supporting this methodology. So thank you very much for coming to my presentation. Please definitely, for those of you who would like to actually write the foreword for the book, please approach me. Grab me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Please add me on LinkedIn. Follow me on Twitter, message me. You can also go to my homepage, alissaknight.com. That's also the book site. You can pre-order the book on Amazon. It is the first book on hacking connected cars. It's a really, really good book, if I should say so myself. Thank you, everybody. It's been an honor. Thank you.
We have some time for questions. Any questions from the audience? Start with a question. When you do penetration tests, what is the nightmare for the attack for the hacker? What is it you don't want to see as a hacker in the car?
From a nightmare as in like the worst, like this is really bad. Usually it's just stuff that we will come across and the company or the client will come back and say, yeah, we didn't know that was turned on. That's very common. We're given a unit, and for example, SSH will be enabled, right? And it's supposed to be production ready. And there was even more specifically to your question. So I'll try and be as generic as possible because this vulnerability has still not been fixed in this product yet. So all of you guys know these aren't very fancy systems, right? They're just basically Linux boxes. They're embedded systems typically running Linux. Whether it's NVIDIA Linux or something else. This particular product, this company, and this is quite common actually, there'll be multiple developers working on the init scripts. For those of you who do not know Linux, init scripts are basically all the scripts that execute at runtime. So as soon as it boots up, it runs these scripts. What we encounter very commonly is there'll be multiple developers that will work on these scripts. And what we found is very common with different companies is one developer will come in and actually put in the init script that something should be mounted read-only, and then a developer will come in afterwards at the end of the script and remount it with read-write. So we'll find that critical directories that were not supposed to be writable will actually be remounted as read-write at the end of the script. So they'll mount it read-only, and someone will come in and say, well, it needs to be writable, and add a new line of the script to mount it as write. The other thing is implementation. So these OEMs will make a very secure product, and flooding quotes. And when it's implemented incorrectly. That's a big one. Where either to save money, so it depends on the customer, it depends on the company. Some of them will do it to save money. Some of them will say, well, it's going to cost 2 extra cents to buy that cable, so we're not going to buy that cable, and we're just going to all through that one cable. And it's implementation, so it's secure when it came out, and then we come and do a penetration test, and we're working with multiple companies in the penetration test, and we find out that the company said, well, we didn't tell them to implement it that way. And the company said, well, we implemented that way to save money. So we've seen a lot of vulnerabilities and a lot of problems and products on a security side get created because it was implemented incorrectly.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
My name is Olenka from Google Cause. Today we have public keys in electronic control units in the vehicle. So I was just wondering, what risks does that public key face if a hacker gets this public key?
So
what can a hacker do with the public key?
yeah, so that's a good question. So a lot of the attacks that we've been able to successfully run against, a unit or target system is keys. Encryption is a big one. Either they didn't encrypt it and they thought they were. Someone said that they were supposed to do it and they didn't, and that person thought that person was supposed to do it. Encryption wasn't turned on. The other thing is poor security around keys. Okay, so example. We had a customer, and there was, I told you about that thing where there's a unit ships with the same initial key. Bad idea, by the way. If you guys are doing that, don't do that. If that initial key gets compromised, you have to change every key in every unit in the entire fleet. So this initial key in this product is used to generate a session key, right? So first time the thing turns on, it uses the initial key to create the algorithm and the key exchange with the backend OEM. The backend OEM, so the unit presents its initial key, the backend OEM says, oh, okay, that's your initial key, let's generate a session key, and then the keys are sent back and forth over this, over GSM. Now, it's not the public keys you need to worry about. The public keys, it's a public key, right? When I'm emailing you, if you need my public key, right? It's my private key that's the problem. And the problems that I run into very commonly, and is a very systemic problem, is poor key security, right? So I haven't seen the list of vendors that are out there yet, but one of the things that we always like to do is, again, it's not about the sky is falling. We're not trying to get you guys to polish up your resume and have to look for a new job. It's not just that, okay, these bad things are being done. It's let's fix it. Let's figure out how to fix it. We all know that this is vulnerable. We all know that it's bad to store private keys in plain text on the file system in a world readable directory. It's securing it. So the answer to your question is find a solution that will allow you to store those private keys securely. Here's another example. Okay, we had a completely different customer take the private keys, and so there's a difference between storing it on the file system and storing it in memory. Okay, so what this company was doing was, it was good, it was in memory, right? But okay, fine, you can use memory carvers to carve the key out of memory. Okay, I get that. But again, it's making it as hard as possible for the hacker to compromise, to continue that kill chain. What the company was doing is they were then storing the key onto the disk. All right, they needed to store it somewhere, so what they would do is it was in memory and they would store it to the disk. It completely negated the reason to store it in memory. So safety, securely storing your private keys is a big thing. It's a big thing you need to focus the most on, is where do you store those private keys and how do you do it securely and still make it available to your developers to be able to use in the system. Yes, sir. Sorry, am I allowed to call? I'm sorry. I just totally eliminated him.
Hello. You said previously that the TCU is basically some embedded Linux. Is it some other? What kind of flavors of Linux distributions should you prefer, or should you be the TCU so that you can run something embedded?
That's a great question. So one of the things is that this isn't. I need to be careful with my answer. Okay. There's a certain degree of sophistication that's required to do this. It's not like you can pull a penetration tester off the street and say, hack this ECU. It doesn't work that way. You have to have a specific understanding of how to hack embedded systems. It's a particular tradecraft, right? I can understand there may be some school of thought where, well, if we use this really awkward, weird kind of, you know, data woo or whatever for RTC. Like maybe there won't be exploits published for it, or maybe no one's heard of it and hackers haven't used it before, and you know, it won't be as big of an attack surface because it's a rare OS. No one really uses it. It's security through obscurity. Not exactly the best idea. What do, in case that's not what you meant, what do I recommend? I mean, any OS as long as you know how to secure it, right? Any OS. You know, NVIDIA Linux is great. We had one customer who was using, Android on the system. You know, as long as you know how to secure it, it doesn't matter what OS you use. File system security, sandboxing. Sandbox your applications. You know, any of you guys have heard of CH-rooted jails? Putting your application in a CH-rooted jail, meaning that if I create a buffer overflow and I cause that application to spill over and crash, and I have it point to shellcode in memory, don't put me in the root file system. Put me in a CH-rooted jail. It's not about the OS itself or the flavor of Linux or the flavor of OS. It's how well did you harden it? And this is a catch-22. We had a customer had come in, and they hardened it so much, applications weren't working. The thing was breaking, it wasn't running. And the VP came in, pissed off. Oh, Alissa, you know, you told us to secure this darn thing, and nothing's working, it's crashing, it won't even stay running. Availability is a security issue, so if you harden it so much that you guys, you know, it's not done properly and you don't know your applications and what they need and what permissions they need, yes, things will crash and no, that's not good. But it's not the fault of security. It's the fact that, you know, you need to harden it properly, right? So, you know, there is a catch-22. You know, you harden it too much and, you know, the thing isn't running and it's crashing constantly, and, you know, there's that balance between usability and security.
Okay, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.